Good morning, everyone. I am Neeti Rao, and today I'd like to take the privilege of welcoming and introducing Dr. Usha Satish and Ms. Akila Satish. Dr. Usha Satish is a professor, Department of Psychiatry at SUNY Upstate Medical University, Syracuse, New York, and has held a visiting professorship at Stanford University at Palo Alto, California, USA, and Jonkoping Academy and Jonkoping, Sweden. She is an experienced scientist with a multidisciplinary background in industrial, clinical, and social psychology. She has decades-long expertise in building man-machine simulations for evaluation and training metacognition in different domains. She is a frequent invited speaker at scientific conferences and is considered an international thought leader within the dynamic arena of decision-making, competency well-being, leadership, and corporate sustainability. She has focused specifically on the fundamental facets of mechanic of decision-making that drive success and well-being in a wide range of organizations in a myriad of industries, from corporations to federal organizations such as NASA, DoD, USAF, and more. She has worked in and led numerous teams to success in using metacognitive training on their decision-making processes and overall well-being. Dr. Satish is widely recognized for her innovative work and research on complex simulation assessments used to evaluate and train decision makers in establishing complex simulations and corporations, defense sector, and education establishment. Her pioneering work with professionals in the how of decision making and using several peer-reviewed journals. Her work on the assessing metacognition and developing successful leaders have been featured in the press, including Harvard Business Review, Wall Street Journal, and NPR. Now I take the privilege of introducing Ms. Akila Satish. Ms. Akila Satish started her career in the life sciences, working in research at the University of Michigan and the National Institute of Health. Today, in addition to her work at MISICNA, Akila acts as an advisor to technology companies. She has been involved in everything from setting early benchmarks, inspiring founders to take the entrepreneurial leap, to helping them find product market fit and manage investors' relations. She is the first call for founders struggling to put out fires, from interpersonal team dynamics to negotiating customer contracts. Ms. Akila is also the executive director of the Science Runway, a non-profit dedicated to inspiring girls to join the life sciences. Under her leadership, the Science Runway has grown from an idea at a roundtable discussion to a successful arm of the Center for Healthcare Innovation, CHI. She serves at the board of directors for Cheese Women in Healthcare and Life Sciences and the board of directors for Lexigram, a healthcare data company. Her published work includes papers in Nature and Human Genomics. She has also written extensively on her chosen field of scientific literacy. She has published over 10 articles in the mainstream media in outlets such as Forbes and the Wall Street Journal, reaching an audience of millions with her passionate arguments for greater scientific education. Ms. Akila Satish has received her Bachelor of Science in Neuroscience with honors from the University of Michigan, her graduate degree in biotechnology from the University of Pennsylvania, and her MBA from Stanford Graduate School of Business. We welcome you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, Neeti. Over to you, Dr. Usha Satish. The floor is all yours, and we are eagerly waiting to hear you.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you very much to Ananthkumar Pratishthana, BMS, and the MBA program here for giving us this opportunity to present our thoughts, vision, and our work, both of us. So I just want to start with Mr. Devesh Pratap gave an amazing introduction, but I would just like to start with a few words. Can you all hear me through this mask? Yeah? That's what I thought. Is this better?
Yes.
Okay, I'm glad I asked. Nothing like sitting for half an hour listening to me ramble on with not hearing anything I'm saying, right? So, so I did want to start with talking a little bit about the vision that we share with Ananthkumar Pratishthana. The foundational principles really lie in the man, and who's truly a legend, and his vision for what leadership, global policy, and so on could be. So we feel tremendously honored to be a part of this program, and I look forward to further dialogue with all of you in all the concepts that we're going to introduce today. So the topic, is this better? All right. So the topic for today is entrepreneurship and leadership in an interconnected world filled with VUCAD, which is VUCA, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, and then I'll talk a little bit about the D. So the topic itself has several words in it that I think are important to focus on. Entrepreneurship, and Usha Satish is going to talk a lot about that. That's her forte and something that she breathes in and out every day. I'm going to touch upon leadership and VUCAD and give introductions to those concepts. Broadly, what I thought would be good to do would be to talk, give you all a brief introduction, and then Akila is going to take over, and then I'd really like to have more audience participation, because no learning is complete without full participation, right? It's great to listen to lectures and didactics, and I'm going to piggyback on something Mr. Pratap said about how the first few seats are always left empty, and I do have to say, I teach across the US and Europe, and it's the same there too. So there's something about this, the first few seats. So having said that, I do want you all to pay attention. We promise not to be boring, that's why we're going to keep our spiel short, but we do want to hear your voices, your concerns, and your curiosities. Post-COVID, we've learned a lot about what can happen to the world, and it was perhaps the greatest example of interconnectedness, not in a positive way, but the whole world was impacted. And with economies of scale and globalization, there's no question that we have to look at a future that's interconnected. So you've got to think about interconnectedness in terms of local interconnectedness within states, within cities. Think about it nationally and then internationally. So I want to hear your thoughts on those subjects as well. When you think about leadership, we constantly talk about leaderships and leaders in politics and leaders in corporations. I like to sort of conceive of this as personal and professional leadership. The two concepts are actually interconnected, as you might imagine. The way we are to ourselves, the way we are to our siblings, brothers, sisters, wives, children, whatever it might be, where we are in our personal space is eventually how we will be when we think about the macrocosm of leadership. And everybody is a leader. Leadership is not restricted only to those who attain the titles of leadership. We're all leaders in our own way. If you're a mother, you are your child's leader when the child is at least very young, at least to a certain point. If you are a student leader, or you have even a group effort in a class, there are leadership skills we bring to the table every day. So that's why I look at it as personal and professional leadership. For both, in my work that I have done for the last 3 decades, I have focused on a concept known as metacognition. So what is metacognition, right? So let me stop here, and if I were to ask you all a question, what are you thinking, right? You probably could answer that question. You might say you're thinking about leadership, you might say you're looking at the slide, you're thinking about something. So that's the what, and that's how the neuroscience of the brain works. There is a what of thinking, but connected to that is something known as the content or the process or the how of thinking. So you have the what, which is the content knowledge, everything we learn from our professors and books, all that is part of content knowledge. But then there's the process and how you manage information, that's left to you. And this is where the skills of metacognition play a role. Now, I guess we have a room of about maybe 50 to 100 students here. Some of you whom I can see and some of you I can't see. But each one of you has a certain thought about the what. Some of you will become great executives and great leaders. I'm sure all of you will eventually do well. But those who succeed and do extremely well are those who are focused on the how of thinking or the process of thinking. In other words, how you manage information is very critical. I won't put anyone on the spot. If this were my classroom, I would be pulling, especially people who I see talking, I always make them answer a question. That's the best way to get full attention. I won't do that to you. I'm a guest lecturer here. But think about what I'm saying. Do you know students whom you were with in school who always aced their exams and they were encyclopedias, but they weren't quite, you didn't think they were really smart, right? They may not really have become the best leaders. So that differential is what is the process of thinking. And there was research done in the United States by Dr. Siegfried Stoifert in Princeton University in what he called his complexity theory labs, actually the same place where Einstein worked. All of us know Einstein, right? So he evolved a system based on a lot of research where he found that real leaders, real corporate leaders, political leaders, the really good ones were those who were able to manage this information well, right? We all come to school in the morning, there's so much to learn. Managing that information is really very, very important to actual real world productivity. So that's sort of what we focus on, and we use the principles of metacognition in understanding leadership dynamics. So there are several effective approaches, and I'm sure you can all read books. There are thousands of, every consulting company has their guidebook of leadership traits. And so I won't dwell on all the hundreds that are there in the literature, but I'm going to talk about a few that I work with, and both in the political arena as well as the corporate arena, and have found to be very effective tricks of the trade or tools of the trade, so to say. The first is the concept of being results oriented. We've all heard that word, right? You've got to be results oriented. Now, when we say results oriented, are all result oriented leaders good leaders? The answer is probably no. That's because there is, in leadership, there are softer traits, and then there are those traits that become more visible. We need to be able to manage those personal spaces. In other words, the concept of integrity, right? Conscientiousness and integrity are very critical to being results oriented. If you're simply results oriented, you may be, I don't know how many heads you must be trampling on, and everybody can meet their goals, right? In some spaces, some countries more easily than others, but that's not true leadership. If you have trampled on 50 people to get to your goal, and then you hold this trophy, which is your goal, it's going to give you pleasure for the moment, but it's not lasting. It's not sustainable leadership. So sustainable leadership has to build that sense of integrity and consciousness into being results oriented. And once again, I did have the privilege of an honor of being associated with Ananthkumar ji over the years, and I felt that this was something he did embody. He was successful not just because he was results oriented, but in that process of attaining, going to your goal post, he had the capacity to be conscientious, to have integrity, and actually look at everybody in a room and understand their emotions and feelings. I go back to one of my favorite authors, Maya Angelou. she had said that, you know, when you interact with people, years later, you may not remember what they said. You may not remember the content of what they said, but you will never forget the emotion associated with what they said. And when you think about it, some of your most dynamic or your most poignant moments when you've had interactions with people, 10 years later, or even when you think about now something that might have happened 10 years ago, you'll see she's right. You may not remember all the contents, but you'll remember the feeling, the emotion. So going back to the first core trait of being results-oriented, very critical to maintain that sense of emotional empathy, integrity, and conscientiousness. The second is strength and courage. We all talk about that all the time, right? But what is it? Strength and courage, again, is frequently spoken about being able to take a stance, being able to stand for your own principles. And I agree, that is important. But here again, I would emphasize, courage is not just looking at being able to take a stand based on your viewpoint. Courage is also being able to accept that you may be wrong. It's also, it's important to understand the room, understand the vibrations, the emotional content of other people's viewpoints. That takes real courage. When I'm in a position of power, I'm a professor in XYZ place, I have the courage to say what I want to say because I can, but that's not real courage. Real courage, I would be demonstrating real courage if I was able to understand the opponent's point of view and then come to a conclusion that I was wrong and accept it. So I think that's a second key factor in leadership that I wanted to talk about. The next one is resourcefulness. And I know that Akhila will address this a little bit more, but open your minds. This is a metacognitive variable that we talk of, which is called breadth of approach. In other words, when you have a problem, how many different facets do you bring to play to solve the issue, and how deeply do you go into each issue? Both these are very critical. Frequently, if we find an easy solution, we accept that and we move forward, which is okay. Sometimes you have to do that, but it's always good to say, how else could I have done this? What other approaches are there? What is X doing? What's Y doing? Keeping your brain constantly alert to this concept of resourcefulness is very important. Try to bring to bear, and I feel I have a stance to say this. I do believe that we as people living in this country, people born and raised in this country, people who've had roots in this country like myself, we are a very resourceful group. In general, I think we are more creative and resourceful than average, and that's a trait you can all play to your advantage. It's something that you can really hone in. The next is communication. Communication is important. I've already spoken a little bit about it, and I don't want to take up all the time. I have to give space to the next speaker. But communication, again, requires not just capacity to articulate. That's number one. We should be able to articulate our thoughts well. And number two, again, be sensitive to others around you. When we talk about articulation, one of the interesting when I coach students, I always tell them, when you have to speak, when you have to say something, just take those few nanoseconds, microseconds, think about it, formulate it in your own brain first, and then present it. That makes it always a lot easier to articulate. So articulation of thoughts requires some degree of meditative, contemplative self-awareness of why we are saying what we are saying and where we'd like to see it go. The next is conflict management. Again, I feel that there is a lot of that in today's world. And as I speak about conflict management, I want to introduce the next terminology that's in our title, which is VUCAD. D. VUCA has been in the management literature for many, many years, decades now. The D was introduced by Professor Siegfried Streufert at Princeton University. It stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, and the D is delayed feedback. You'll all learn about VUCA in the management literature, so I won't go too much into detail except to say that we've all faced a lot of VUCA in the last 2 years. Did anyone know a pandemic would take over the whole world the way it did? Certainly not something I could have conceived of. You heard in my introduction, I build simulation technology for a living, and that's part of my training. I do this for different government agencies in the US and outside. And yes, we do build things like, epidemics and endemics and so on. We've never really thought that something like that would actually happen, and it did. So we've all had a lot of VUCA in our lives, and the last concept of delayed feedback, which Professor Streufert introduced, has to do with an intrinsic psychological variable, which is we all like, and especially the younger generation who've grown up with Facebook and WhatsApp and just technology in general, you used to getting responses immediately, right? When I first learned to drive, I had to learn to look at a map. I don't know if I could do that anymore because I'm so used to having Google tell me turn left, turn right. Everything is instantaneous, right? So there is a human need for immediate need gratification. And people who are successful are those who actually can delay that gratification a little bit. They can wait a little bit to say what's happening. Let's see how this plays out. Delayed gratification has another unseen benefit, which is you get more information if you wait a few minutes before making a conclusion about something. You've given yourself the luxury of gathering more information. So VUCAD is something that we all need to learn and train with, and we run programs across the globe, particularly management students or people working in the defense. They all need to learn how to work with VUCAD, and surgeons as well is another group we focus on. So we train people on how to handle VUCAD because that's something everybody has to learn in their day-to-day lives, no matter whether you work for a corporation, you work for yourself, you work for an NGO, it doesn't matter. You will face VUCAD, so becoming a VUCAD expert is always a good thing. And that brings me to the conflict management part of leadership, where the best conflict managers are those who can communicate well and who can float through VUCAD well. Both those traits are very critical. The last two points that I will point out are, so these are all things that we train in, and the last two have to do with insights and intuition, the two big I's in leadership. Insights are gained by good metacognitive comprehension, everything that I've spoken about so far. The stronger you are with your VUCAD training, the stronger you are with all these other factors that I spoke about, the better you're going to be with with your insights. Once you gain these insights, learn to use it in a way that is most focused and results oriented in an empathetic and with good communicative style. Intuition we are all born with, not always easy to hone in your intuitions. Some people are just naturally intuitive and others tend to be not so. But again, pay attention to your intuitions. Those who have accomplished a certain level of leadership training with all these insights and all built in will be able to have good intuition. So I'm going to wrap up with just talking about, with quickly highlighting, summarizing these 4 factors. First, managing information. Second, managing your tasks. Third, crisis. And fourth is strategy. And these four elements are the sort of building blocks on which all those other factors that I listed out rest. So with that, I will hand this over to Akila. And she's going to lead you more in the entrepreneurship and leadership domain.